found that patients with hospital-acquired infections were nearly 6 times as likely to die as other hospital patients who did not contract them. Today, researchers publish new findings about the causes and costs of this problem in a special issue of the American Journal of Medical Quality. Dr. Richard Shannon of the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Medicine is one of the authors, and he joins me now. We mentioned 6 times more likely to die, but Doctor, in the Pennsylvania hospitals you studied, is this a widespread, common occurrence?
Well, I think, Ray, it's very clear from the report in Pennsylvania that these infections occur far more commonly than we ever thought. And I think my own experience in my own hospital is that very recently we've recognized that these can be everyday occurrences. So clearly the problem is substantial.
How do you distinguish between something that was actually caught during a hospital stay and the illnesses that a patient already had when they came through the door?
Sure. So in the Pennsylvania Healthcare Cost Containment Report, there were 4 classes of infections that were the principal focus. Infections due to intravenous catheters placed in the vein called central line infections, surgical site infections in areas where a surgical wound was created, catheter-related urinary tract infections, and then ventilator-associated pneumonias, pneumonias that occur in people that are on a ventilator. Now, I think most people only get central catheters and only are on a ventilator in a hospital, so it's pretty easy to understand those 2 classes of infections. Similarly, most surgical procedures occur in the hospital, and so someone that develops a fever in the postoperative period and has an infection in their wound is pretty easy to recognize. I think the one area where it is somewhat controversial are the urinary tract infections, because people at home and as outpatients can sometimes have bacteria in their bladder and be asymptomatic, and so that could well be present when they're admitted. But the overwhelming majority of the infections reported here clearly occurred while the patient was in the hospital.
The overwhelming majority. Now, is this bad practice, or is this just the risk of getting treatment for these kinds of illnesses in a hospital?
Well, I think that it's long been considered that these are an inevitable consequence of the complex care and the very sick patients that come to the hospital today. But our own experience in Pittsburgh at Allegheny General Hospital suggested that while sicker patients are at greater risk, that the principal cause of most of these infections are variations in processes, and that the delivery of care has not been reliable in many regards. For example, we observed in our own work that doctors had 6 or 7 different ways in which they gowned and gloved to perform a central line procedure. There were different ways in which nurses and respiratory therapists cared for endotracheal tubes. When we were able to specify and standardize the way in which those processes were conducted, we were able to eliminate a lot of the variation that we believe is the breeding ground for these errors. So a lot of these infections are truly preventable by simply standardizing the delivery of care. Yet some of them clearly are going to persist as a result of the critical illness that many patients have.
Were the hospitals that you looked at willing to be overseen in this way, to have their processes, the way they take care of patients, watched in order to catch these things?
Yes, I think it's a good point. The leadership at our hospital, Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh, and Connie Sobrone, the CEO, had to be very courageous to first allow the observations and then actually to allow the economic analysis to occur. And so, too, the work that's ongoing now at the University of Pennsylvania, the leadership there has really been very courageous in exposing, opening their doors to outside observers to come in and see these defects. But we believe that the only way we can overcome them is if we really recognize them. We can't fix it if we don't realize it's broken. And in fact, inviting in outside observers to help us understand these defects has really been instrumental. But it does take courage, and I think the leaders in my 2 cases have really been exemplary in that regard.
So what are some of the easy things, some of the low-hanging fruit that hospitals can pick right away?
Well, the first thing I think that we need to do that was very successful in our experience in Pittsburgh was whenever there was an infection, immediately, as soon as we identified it, going to the bedside and trying to figure out not who done it, not who was the perpetrator, but rather what went wrong in the process. And by interviewing nurses and nurses' aides, speaking to doctors that are involved in the care, you unleash this incredible knowledge and wisdom that these people have about where the defect in the process may have occurred. That allows you to do 2 things. One is you can identify that and fix it right away. And secondly, and very importantly, you can say to the patient and their family, you know, I'm really sorry this infection happened, but we know why, and we're committed to making sure it never happens again. And I think those two things are going a long way toward really beginning to transform this problem in healthcare.
Give me a quick example of a change in hospital procedure that could immediately change patient outcomes in this way.
Well, I'll tell you the most astonishing one to me was the fact that in a patient that has an endotracheal tube, a breathing tube in their throat that's connected to a ventilator, if you elevate their head of their bed 30 degrees as opposed to having them lie flat, you can minimize the chance that secretions laden with bacteria in their mouth actually make it into their lung. So at no cost, raising the bed 30 degrees in a reliable way every time and making sure everyone that comes in contact with the patient is sufficient to really have a dramatic impact on these ventilator-associated pneumonias. Pneumonias that have a mortality that approaches 30% and from which the loss in any given case can approach $25,000.
And what can patients do? Are they expected to have a role in this improvement as well?
So in the systems that we developed both in Pittsburgh and now at the University of Pennsylvania, there are a lot of visual clues. We put, for example, at the head of the bed a sign that says, if you see red, elevate the head. So what that means is if you can see a red line, the patient's head isn't elevated sufficiently. So a patient's family walks in and says, what's that sign mean? And the nurse explains to them, please, if you ever see the head of the bed not elevated, we want to make sure that you let us know because we're trying to protect your mom or your dad or your friend from contracting these infections.
And are patients and their families really going to challenge the people who give them care, or does that take a sort of cultural change in the way we deal with hospitals and doctors?
So we're certainly not there yet, although I think the concept of patient-centered care is beginning to evolve to the point where we're really thinking about families and friends that visit our patients as allies in trying to identify problems that can go wrong. The more eyes you have looking at this, the better. There's always a concern that a patient's family may not realize the severity or the seriousness of a circumstance and call for help or point out a defect that's unnecessary, but that's not been our experience. Most of the time, patients and their families, or families in particular, are deeply interested in trying to make sure that we're doing everything we can to prevent these.
So if you're not sure, ask, should this
Absolutely.
be wet? Should this be changed?
Absolutely. Did you wash your hands? I never mind being asked that. In fact, I try and demonstrate to patients when I walk in the room that I in fact am washing my hands so that there's no doubt about that. Those are very important clues.
Dr. Richard Shannon, thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you.